I curated some short video clips to kind of walk everybody through enucleation, at least with the Holmium laser, and some of the tips and tricks. And we always have these disclosures, but when it comes to this talk, the only disclosures that are relevant is that I trained to do open simple prostatectomies, and it used to be my absolute favorite surgery. Now I do HoLEPs, and I do a lot of HoLEPs, and I've done a lot of HoLEPs. So this is all hard-earned knowledge. So when we think about BPH and we think about all the things that are on there, HoLEP is the only one that fits into every kind of bucket or every kind of prostate or pretty much anything that you would want to do. The big issue is how do we make ourselves successful? How do we make this operation easy and accessible and kind of shorten that learning curve? I think when you start the procedure, the most important thing is to understand the landmarks. People talk about getting lost. And usually it's when I find that my residents take out their aggression or their parental issues on the verumontanum. I call this the cradle of life. If you preserve the vero, you have a reference point that will serve you for the rest of the procedure. So identify that, identify where their urinary orifices are, and determine what your technique is. It's based on size, whether it's a 2-lobe, 3-lobe technique, whether you're doing an in-block technique. What is your laser? Are you using the traditional laser? Are you using the Moses? Are you using a low power? And what are your settings? These are the settings that I use because it's kind of that maximum efficiency without the lightsaber mode where my residents aren't cutting through things and they don't recognize planes and things like that. So this is just a simple example of a small prostate where there's not a big median lobe. We just start with a 6 o'clock incision right down the middle to identify the capsule. The most important part about starting out is finding that capsule where you get away from the fluffy white adenoma, where you get down to the capsule where you can see those capillary vessels on the tissue. You can see it going from white to tan, and you really identify that. And so once you identify those circular fibers of the bladder neck that you can see, then you identify the capsule. We use the beak of the scope, just like your finger in open surgery. And I think that's one of the unique things about this particular surgery is that you're actually using the scope the same that you would in open surgery. So it's all about traction and countertraction with this and identifying down to the capsule. Again, you're preserving all of those various structures. This is another patient showing a median lobe. With the median lobe, the only difference is you find that same plane, but you do it in the 5 and the 7 o'clock area in that sulcus. What you'll find is the closest place to the capsule is always in those sulcus areas. So the shortest distance from the adenoma to the capsule is in those sulcus. And so you want to identify the sulcus on either side, and then you just kind of enucleate that median lobe. And this is a great place to get started with enucleation. If you've got a patient with trilobular BPH, try just enucleating the median lobe first and having another modality in your back pocket, whether it's bipolar, something else like that. What you could see there real quickly was a nodule. These multinodular prostates, just like that sit in there like pearls. But then you can just retrograde, enucleate that median lobe, and it's a great way to start getting comfortable and familiar with the procedure. So once you do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the different kind of permutations of what you can do at the apex. This goes back to the earlier, what I like to do is I use that scope bluntly to identify around the shoulder of the prostate and getting up into that anterior prostate. The important part about getting to the anterior prostate, you see the same compressed adenoma that you see in the posterior part. You can see a real clear delineation here between the white fluffy adenoma and then the capsular plane of that prostate. And that's the plane you want to be in. As you take it anteriorly, what I like to do is I like to go all the way into the bladder. What you'll see, and you'll see it better in the next clip, is you'll see an invagination of the mucosa as it comes into the prostatic urethra, and then you take that right into the bladder neck. And then that allows you to circumferentially dissect off the bladder neck. And there you can see, we can see through the mucosa, you can see those fibers, how they're straight instead of going east to west, they're going north to south, giving you that bookmark to where you know you're at the bladder neck to finish dissecting that prostate. Here is another, whoops, that went backwards. Another clip, again, showing this anterior dissection. And it's almost like, because you have to think of that prostate, it's almost like making a horizon. But as you see here, right at midline, you start to see these fibers coming straight instead of longitudinally. That's where that mucosa from the bladder comes into the prostatic urethra, again, telling you're in that safe space, allowing you to carry on that dissection, really dissecting out the bladder neck. Then really the next step of the surgery comes down to, it's a big surgery. You got to separate the right from the left lateral lobe. A lot of people talk about in block technique for prostate for HoLEP. It works if it's a small prostate. If you've got a 300-gram prostate, you cannot do in block. The advantage of doing that whole anterior dissection first is when you come from the urethral side, you cut into a known plane. You don't have to worry about going too deep. You're cutting into a known plane of dissection. This makes it easy, this makes it quick, and allows you to separate the right from the left lateral lobe. Once this is done, you can then push one of the lobes into the bladder, and that gives you more working room to manipulate the other lobe as you free up the lateral and posterior attachments of it. So again, that's another reason why at the very beginning, I go all the way into the bladder so that when you have to separate these lobes, you're separating into a known plane, not into an unknown plane. And so it makes it very easy. The other thing you notice is how dry this is. You can see your clear field of view. This is an important lesson that I always tell my residents. It's a pay-as-you-go phenomenon. If you see a blood vessel, get hemostasis right then and there. Don't let it keep going for the rest of the case. Just control it right at the beginning. It makes everything else easier, sets you up from a vision standpoint, and allows you to finish that off. This is an example of the traditional of what we used to do. What you see there is you see what's called the mucosal bridge. And that's because we used to take our scope and we'd go all the way around and we'd leave a little anterior bridge when we did that anterior commissure. Then what we would do is we'd put the scope in, we'd circle it around that anterior bridge, and that would pull it away from the membranous urethra, pull it away from that sphincter so that when you cut it in the middle of the urethra and you limited the risk of thermal injury or spread of thermal injury to the sphincter. However, what we've learned is that when you do this, this kind of rips the mucosa away from the urethra a little bit. And my personal theory is that it kind of engenders a urinoma around the sphincter. Because when we looked at our data, about 30% of men would have some temporary leakage up until 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden, it was like somebody hit a switch and it stopped. Well, that's the time it takes to reepithelialize that muscle. And once that's reepithelialized, that incontinence rate drops down to less than 1%, about 0.4% when you look at the data. So that's the way that we used to do it. Now, contemporarily, we do this early apical release. People call it different things, early apical release, mucosal-sparing. But what you're seeing here is basically I'm going around using the sphincter as my kind of my reference point, and I'm taking those initial cuts and I'm cutting through the mucosa and the submucosa so that when I do that swing around the apex bluntly with no energy, what I'm doing is I'm preserving the mucosa over that sphincter because I've created a fracture plane where it wants to fracture so it no longer pulls the mucosa off that muscle. Once that is kind of done, we do it on both sides, then we connect the dots, the right from the left, and we do it under direct vision facing forward. The advantage of this is it puts no stress on the membranous urethra. You're connecting one cut to the other cut. It's all in front of you. It's all done precisely. In this way, you preserve all the mucosa around the sphincter. And what we've seen is our temporary incontinence rate went from 30% down to about 6%. So this has been a real true advantage in this surgery for patients, at least in the temporary. Long term, it doesn't make a difference. But now all of your apex is completely freed up. Lastly, just some words about hemostasis. Like I said, the great thing about the Holmium laser is it's very hemostatic. When you see these bleeders, the most important thing is defocus it at first. Get away from it and get closer. What we don't want to do is we don't want to create holes because this laser will cut through everything. You want to just get to the tissue. You want to leave it there longer than you think that you need to, but you don't want to go deep because remember, based on the wavelength of this laser, it only penetrates tissue 0.4 millimeters, so not even half a millimeter. So you want to leave it right on that bleeder. You want to let that collagen cross-link across the ostia of that vessel to really get good hemostasis. Lastly, when you're doing enucleation, you want to get out all of that tissue because that allows the capsule to collapse and get you a good hemostatic benefit. Couple real notes about morcellation. You know, people get scared around morcellation. Anytime you put a vacuum cleaner with razor blades in there, it is a scary proposition. Out of the 6,000, we've had 2 bladder injuries. Here you see it's all about being able to see. If you can't see, you can't do the procedure. Remember to stay in the center of the bladder. I pick the tissue up. You're seeing the old morcelator here. This one, I don't even know if you can get it anymore. It's the VersaCut. It's the one Luminous did. It was incredibly painful. Now we have the piranha. Here's an example of a large prostate. Sometimes it's so big you can't see everything that you need to or you're able to push it into the bladder. So this is where I'm actually morcelating in situ, where I've done about half the dissection, and now I'm putting my morcelator to remove that tissue so then I can do more of the dissection. It's a little bit longer, but it's safe. And when you're morcelating the prostatic fossa, it's even easier. Lastly, just an example of morcellation after a urolith. This is a patient that had urolith. You'll see some of the clips in here. And what happens is the clips typically jam your blades. It means you have to take the blades out, pull the clip out, and then keep going with the morcellation. There you see some of the string from the morcellation there. So with that, I think we're running close to time. I'm going to leave you with a couple thoughts. I typically put in a 22 three-way Foley catheter at the end of surgery. I put them on CBI while they go to the PACU because sometimes my anesthesia colleagues wake these patients up hard. That causes some hemostasis. This is an incredible device, this little one-touch device, and I have no disclosures with this company. What it does is it turns the Foley catheter into a transducer. It hooks up to the balloon in the Foley catheter, and you can actually do a urodynamics on the patient in the post-op. And I have them void. And if they're able to mount a detrusor pressure of 40 centimeters of water, we take their Foley catheter out same day and send them home with no Foley catheter. In our study of our first 150 patients, 83% of our patients were able to go home the same day with no Foley catheter. It's a simple and easy test to see if they're going to be able to void successfully when they leave. The remainder return to clinic the next day for their Foley catheter removal. I do not do the one-touch test when they come back the next day in clinic, because only 5 to 8% of patients require long-term Foley catheter. Again, talked about the antibiotics. I continue the baby aspirin if at all possible, but otherwise, that's HoLEP in a nutshell. So thank you very much.